Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time we're talking episode 9 of season 4 of The Walking Dead called After. And this episode, of course, picks up just seconds after this mid-season finale from a while back. And I gotta say, this is really, really good stuff. I took this show to task for those two pretty much crap episodes that focused on the governor getting himself back on his feet. I was not pleased by those episodes at all. Here, nothing but good stuff. And it's probably no coincidence at all that these episodes were written by Walking Dead creator Robert Kirkman. Okay, nobody knows these characters better than the man that created them. So, and all the episodes that Kirkman has written for the show have been good ones, and this is no exception. So let's just start in on a few of the little things, and we'll move on to the bigger stuff. First of all, one thing that occurred to me early on in this episode is, why is it that the walkers don't seem to smell Michonne? We've established that the walkers can smell normal people. Remember in the very early episodes, Glenn and Rick cover themselves in gore from some poor, unfortunate soul in order to be able to move around Atlanta a little bit. Well, here Michonne's just walking around all these walkers, and they're not paying the least little bit of attention to her. On the other hand, you can probably excuse that as, say, it's the result of all the smoke and burning and stuff in the air around the prison. I mean, they've recently just had a tank fire off an artillery round, so you can pretty easily chalk that up to all of that just masking her smell. We also get a definitive answer on the fate of the governor. He took one to the head, so we will not be seeing the governor as a zombie. If he does pop up again, it will almost certainly just be as a hallucination or some sort of a flashback. But I think, given the nature of what we see in this episode, hallucination is probably the best bet there. And of course, we get to see Herschel. I kind of thought that Michonne earlier had taken a second to jab him in his head to make sure they wouldn't resurrect, but I guess I was mistaken. And that was a hard moment. I really, really did like Herschel. He was a great character and so wonderfully portrayed by Scott Wilson. And just seeing the Herschel zombie heads, like, oh God, Herschel, you poor bastard. Now, I found out that was actually an animatronic head. And you can kind of tell by looking at it. But from what I've heard around the net, apparently they used that they brought that onto the Talking Dead podcast that they do for this show. And host Chris Hardwick apparently tried to feed it pudding or some such thing. You gotta love Chris Hardwick. The guy's come a long way since the days of MTV's Singled Out. And hey, he's also done voice work on the Avatar: The Legend of Korra, which I also review. And in case you're wondering, he's the voice of adult Sokka. So yeah, dude, you're cool, man. Anyway, let me see here. Just kind of taking a glance at my notes. Okay, so by and large, this episode really is Carl's story, but we get a lot of really nice secondary stuff with Michonne. So let's talk about her, and then we'll segue over into Carl. So here we get to see this glimpse of the person that Michonne was before the world went to hell. We get to see her boyfriend and his best friend. I can't recall exactly if she spelled this out here on the show, but in the comics she makes it very clear that the two walkers that she originally had following her around and using them to mask her scent were her boyfriend and his best friend. We also get some confirmation that, yeah, Michonne had a kid at some point in the past. And, of course, this is why she broke down that one time in regards to Judith. Now, Michonne drops some hints here as to sort of what happened with her boyfriend and her son. And to me, the way she sounded, it makes sort of like the boyfriend had killed the son and, some kind of murder-suicide thing to kind of take him and his son out of this horrible world in which the world he had known had turned. And frankly, I gotta say, folks, if there really ever was a zombie apocalypse, I'd be in a pretty quick hurry to jam a gun in my mouth too, because no way am I gonna try and live out the rest of my life in a world like that. So it's hard to blame the guy. Now, of course, the whole situation there is somewhat open to interpretation. So I have the feeling we might get some clarification on exactly what happened later on in this season. Sorry, just cleaning some dust off my computer. Oof. Clean this place a little bit better. Anyway, so let me see here. Okay, yeah. What I liked about this episode, another thing I liked about this episode, is that Michonne, when she sees the female walker, who is the black lady with the dreadlocks, just what it kind of, you see it building and grating on her more and more, and Michonne just is looking at that and seeing, but for the grace of God, this is what could have happened to her if she'd just been, basically not been so darn good with that sword. That really could have been her fate. And that combined with, once again, losing everyone that she cared about, her boyfriend, her son. She apparently had a really good relationship with her boyfriend's best friend, obviously a good friend to her. And now, pretty safe to say, all three guys in her life are dead, and, well, one bit of bad luck, and she'd have been a walker too. Like I said, it's really hard to not blame her for just exploding in that. Literally in this big spiral of death, a whole circle of dead zombies all around her, which, admittedly is rather unrealistic. Katanas are cool, but in real life, you can't really use those things to hack through like 20 people. They're actually, in many ways, a surprisingly delicate weapon. They require a lot of maintenance, from at least according to my understanding of swords. But anyway, it's TV, right? So, what? Let's see here. I also like how she actually sort of takes that time to sort of have a talk with her dead boyfriend. It really shows a very wonderfully human moment. And of course, it brings her back from the way she sort of reverted. She reverted to the old emotionless Michonne, who focused only on survival. And she practically breaks down in tears when she finds Rick and Carl, showing that the time with the prison gang has indeed changed her. That she has become a kind of person who is willing and wants to care about others again. Now, granted, there was some of that in her relationship with Andrea, but I think we are all kind of tired of Andrea. The past is the past, and blah, 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 and let's just not talk about Andrea anymore, because it's not comic book Andrea, who is friggin' awesome. It's TV Andrea, who's not as cool. Anyway, so getting back to everything, let's move on over and talk to Carl. And here we see a really interesting dynamic. And Carl, I think timeline-wise, he's supposed to be somewhere in the neighborhood of about 13 or 14 years old, give or take. But let's say he's somewhere around junior high school age at this point. And from what I remember when I was that age, man, I really kind of have to give it to my family for putting up with me as much as they did. And I've probably mentioned before that I've worked in education, and I've worked with junior high school kids. And on the one hand, you have to have a great deal of sympathy for them. They're going through all these enormous emotional and physical changes. I mean, there really is few things in life that we all experience that's harder than the transition from child to adulthood. So, yeah, you understand where they're coming from when they're acting like jerks, but dear God, junior high school kids can be such annoying little pricks. And I remember when I was that age, and I kind of thought, you know what? I understand the way the world works. These adults around me are all annoying and stupid, and they just don't get me at all. I kind of wish that I could just go and live by myself. I'd be just fine on my own. And of course I was completely and utterly wrong. And that's what Carl learns by the end of this episode, when he thinks, oh God, my dad's turned into a walker, I might have to kill him. And he can't bring himself to do it. He even says what he thinks are probably going to be his final words, just do it. And you see, that was what kids at that age just do not want to admit to themselves. That as much as they want that independence that comes with adulthood, never really putting any real consideration into the things like student loans and bills and all the other less than fun things that come with adulthood, what they also want is they still want that steady hand. They want to take those steps out there to kind of start finding their feet as mature individuals. But they still want that support, that guidance from the adults in their lives. They just want it to be a little more hands off. And getting a kid to admit that is basically impossible. But that's just one thing that you have to remember when you're dealing with kids that age. You cannot condescend to them, tempting though it might be. Believe you me. Unfortunately, one of the things they teach you when you work in education is don't use sarcasm on the kids. Kids hate to be on the receiving end of sarcasm. Admittedly, this is not always the easiest thing in the world to do, especially if somebody like me who's naturally a bit of a sarcastic person anyway. But yeah, you really do just do nothing but make the situation worse when you drop sarcasm on kids that age. But anyway, getting back to things, Carl is to one degree right. He is not a kid. His dad really needs to stop treating him like one. Rick yells at him for cursing at one point. And come on. Really, Rick? Is bad language something you need to be lecturing Carl about in a world filled with zombies? But yeah, then again, Rick's a guy from the South, so anyway. But what's really interesting here is, yes, we see that Carl is extremely capable of surviving in this world. But as we also see, he repeatedly makes serious mistakes, and if he was a little less lucky, he'd be dead or a walker. There's just no two ways about it. And seeing them, and I really like how they really sort of balance it out between Carl and Michonne this episode. This episode, we really see Michonne mourning what it is that she lost. She's mourning essentially the person that she used to be. She has lamenting what it is that she has become. Carl, when he goes into that room in the house, and we see what's obviously a teenage boy's bedroom, it's decked out, it's got video games, it's got a big screen TV, and Carl is like, whoa, this room is awesome. And he allows himself to revel in it for just a few seconds. And then immediately starts tearing out power cords to help set up a secure base in the living room. You even sort of see that moment where he realizes this is dumb. This is all this stuff here, these video games and big screen TVs they're irrelevant. They're useless. You see him pull in. But when he takes that moment to write that mocking message on the door, and then he just sits there on the roof eating pudding while Walker sort of claws trying to get at him, it shows, while Michonne laments the person that she has become, Carl has embraced the person that he has become. It's not a perfect transition for either of them, but nothing in life is ever perfect. But it just kind of goes with what I've said repeatedly in my reviews here, is that the younger characters like Carl and Beth and those other two girls, the sisters that Carol was looking after, the kids who are growing up in this world are going to be even harder than the adults who have kept them alive to this point. This is their reality. They eventually will have spent more time in this world than the one before it. All of that's just going to seem like a hazy memory of a time when you could just walk down the street, go to the mall, play video games, walk into a restaurant and order a meal. Just hazy memories, practically illusions. And in that situation, how could they not be harder than the people who spent most of their lives in this fantasy world of before? And one thing that I like is if you have to really pay attention to it, is in the restaurant. They say the restaurant where Rick and Carl fight the Walker. It's called Joe and Joe Jr.'s Barbecue Shack or something like that. And if you look at the note that the guy left, apparently I guess he couldn't bring himself to commit suicide after he got bit or whatever. He says, "Please do what I can't, Joe Jr." Kind of have to wonder if he got bit by Joe Sr. But anyway, I mean, father and son, right there. I mean, it's not subtle, but it's a nice touch. And I like how, at the culmination of this episode, after everything that's happened, after their disagreements, after Carl making some rather insulting comments about Rick wanting to be a farmer, Rick acknowledges to Carl, "You're a man." Now, Carl, of course, physically and emotionally, he's not quite there yet. But Carl's not a kid anymore, and let's face it, the concept of what we traditionally think of a teenager is rather irrelevant in the zombie apocalypse world. And keep in mind, the idea of adolescence is actually sociologically still a very new one. For most of human history, you were either a child or you were an adult. There really was no in-between. I mean, of course, the teenage years always existed. But basically, once you were old enough that puberty kicked in, you were considered enough of an adult that you could go out and be apprenticed to learn a craft, or if you were female, possibly getting married. So again, the whole thing of being a teenager that we think of, still a relatively new thing. In fact, the word teenager only really entered popular use in the English language in the 1950s. In the 1950s, folks, the 50s. So it really just does go to show you how quickly society changes. But what I like about that scene is it's a scene that, as a guy, I have to say, I think this is a moment that all boys want. We all want that moment from our dads or from whoever the father figure we have in our lives is. And now, granted, we don't have a traditional right of manhood or anything like that in modern American society. And there are maybe some good points to that being the case and some bad points to that. But the acknowledgement is still kind of one of those things that you crave growing up. And I remember there wasn't exactly, I think, a moment specifically between me and my dad like that. But there was a moment when I was 19 and I realized that I was now considered another one of the adults in the family. Unfortunately, that moment was shortly after the death of my grandmother, which hit everybody in the family really, really hard. But when talking with my family about, the whole situation, I realized quietly in just kind of a moment with my conversation with my dad and my stepmom, yeah, the way they're talking to me, this is different than how they would have spoken to me a couple of years ago. I'm one of the adults in the family now. They view me as, I guess a peer, really. And even though that was a really hard time for our family, I was really happy in that moment. I realized things have changed. I'm one of the adults now. They take what I say seriously. They take my opinions and feelings like they would from someone else who's also an adult. And that's a moment, folks. That's a moment you never really quite forget, where you really realize that you have completed a journey. Anyway, so that's all I got for you this time around. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And until next time, folks, take care and have a good one.